Hey folks, it's Mike, Kilo Echo Zero, Victor India Mike, the traveling ham. We are at Crystal Beach in Texas. There is the Gulf of Mexico. The weather has finally turned beautiful here on February 1st. Just the last couple days it's turned nice. It's been cloudy and cool and rainy. There's the beach and there's the camper. We are set up right on this beach. There's so many beaches out here. The sand's just like a parking lot. You can drive right on it, even in a two-wheel drive vehicle. It's beautiful. Great location, great weather, right here on the Gulf. Only problem is, it's not a POTA site. Unlike where we were a couple years ago at Padre Island, this is not a POTA location, so no activations from this spot. So we're gonna do a So you want to activate video for all you folks out there wanting to get into activation. In the last two videos, we've talked about the rules of parks on the air, and we've talked about how to find a park, how to research a park. Today, we're getting to some of the fun stuff. We're going to talk about how to get your station set up for portable operations, activating parks on the air. Let's go. Hey folks, here's the deal. I'm at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. This is going to be a special one. We're way up this mountain. This is the operating station here. Kilo Echo Zero, Victor India Mike, park to park.
The traveler has come.
It was a huge, beastly, bulging man. Plates were from Kansas.
Okay, if you take nothing else away from this video, remember these two things. First, start with what you got. If you can set up a portable station with equipment that you already have, and you can get some experience activating POTA without having bought any equipment, that is the perfect situation. Two, if you do have to buy equipment, stay as practical as you possibly can. I'm a very practical person. Some people might say cheap, but it's perfect for this situation. The reason I say these things is that, like ham radio itself, activating parks on the air can take you in a lot of different directions. And it's hard knowing when you're first getting in what direction that you're gonna take. I started activating in this beast you see here behind me. That's the way I thought I was gonna activate. I was going to be in that RV. I was gonna be hooked up to the 400 amp hours that I have in batteries in there, and I used the ladder that I used to have on the side there to support a mast, and that's how I thought I was going to operate. Well, I quickly learned that it was far too cumbersome. I wanted to be much more mobile. I wanted to be camping in one spot and maybe go activate somewhere else. You can't always be camping in a POTA entity after all. After one trip where we were camping by Carlsbad Caverns, the campground was neither in Carlsbad nor Guadalupe Mountain, but I wanted to activate both. So we packed up the family, drove to a kind of removed part of Carlsbad Caverns, set up the station, activated, packed the family back there again, drove down about 15 miles or so to Guadalupe Park, and set up and activated there. It was far too cumbersome. It was way too inconvenient for everybody, including me. And I learned real quick that that wasn't gonna work. So the next thing that I got was the Wolf River Coils antenna that you can see up on top of the RV there. And I got this lithium phosphate battery. And what that did is that made me pickup truck mobile. So now what I could do is operate out of the tailgate of my truck. I could drive away from the RV. I had a battery to take with me. I had an antenna that didn't need to be hoisted up by the rear end of the RV, and everything was fine. So I operated that way for quite some time. I'd say about a year and a half. What happened after that is we ended up in northern Maine, and I found myself surrounded by 8 parks on the air parks that had never been activated. I had the opportunity in one rove to activate 8 parks that had never been activated. That's pretty cool. They just dumped a bunch of new parks in the system Before they did that, I don't think it probably wasn't possible anywhere else in the country to find that many parks that had not been activated, I'm guessing. So I wanted to take the advantage of that opportunity and go activate all those parks. What happened was there were at least 2, maybe 3 of those parks that I couldn't get to where I needed to activate via my truck. I had to hike. And at that point, the setup that I had with this big heavy battery, my Kenwood TS440, which is a mobile radio, but is about the size of what, like an ICOM 7300 would be. A good sized radio, something you're not going to put in a backpack. And my antenna setup, my 17-foot whip, all that stuff was a little bulky for a backpack. So my setup started to change again. Now I want to fit into a backpack. Enter the Yaesu FT891. I can fit this in a backpack and take a fairly serious hike. It does have some weight to it. I think it's 5 pounds, but can fit in a backpack, and it's reasonable. I also acquired a smaller 4.5 amp hour Bioenno lithium phosphate battery. 4.5 amp hours, 15 amp hours. See the difference? This I can put in a backpack and carry, but I knew I was going to have some more serious hikes coming up, and I was going to want something lighter. This went in the pack with me down to the bottom of Grand Canyon. This weighs 1 pound, this weighs 5 pounds. That's night and day when you're talking about a pack and you're going to be going down into a 4,500 feet into a canyon, or up on a mountain for that matter. And now I find myself, doing. I don't think I'm going to be doing hikes that extreme all that often, but there's going to be instances like that. And I'm going to want to go even lighter. So I may at some point want a battery smaller than this. I'm going to want a radio smaller than the FT891. Maybe it's less than a pound. Maybe a more like a Morse code only kind of radio is what I'm going to be after. And with that and a battery, I can stay super light. And if I'm going down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, if I'm hiking up way on top of the mountain, I've got something that's not going to be too much of a burden. So that's how my journey has kind of evolved over time. Yours is going to do something similar. Where you start is probably not where you're going to finish. So back to the original points. Start with what you got. Get out there and get some experience and see what you enjoy. Try some different parks. Try activating in some different ways and see what really gets your juices flowing. And if that's then going to require some changes in your equipment setup, go for it. If you need to buy some equipment to get started, stay practical. This is not an expensive radio. I think I got this right around $600. And it can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used as a base station. It can ride in a backpack. It can be used in a vehicle. I can use it in a tailgate operation. There's a lot of operations in which it can fit. It may not be perfect in most of them, but it will certainly work and not be cumbersome in any of them. And that's worth a lot to me if I can get that out of one radio. So again, the final 2 points. Start with what you got. If you can get going without buying any equipment, do it. And if you need to buy any new equipment, keep it practical. Don't get anything too fancy. Don't go for the ICOM 705. It's going to be $1,400. Okay, now I'm not making any kind of product recommendations in this video. Yes, I run the Yaesu FT891. I paid for this. I wasn't sent it. I'm not affiliated with any company that makes any of the products that I might show you in this video. That's not the point. I will use my experiences, I will use my equipment as examples of a direction that you could go. But what I want to do is guide you down that path so that you can make all those decisions yourself. Here was my experience. Here's why I made the decisions I did. Here's why I got the equipment I did. Your path is going to be different. I'm not going to make recommendations for specific equipment for you. hopefully hearing some of my journey and advice that I can give from my experiences will help you along. All right, so let's talk about some of that equipment. Keep in mind, there's only 4 things that you actually need for an activation. You need a radio, you need an antenna, you need a power source, and you need all the things to connect those 3 things together. That is it. That is all you need. That's all the equipment you have to have. So when I say start with what you got, that's all you need. You don't need a computer. You don't need a digital interface. You don't need any of these other things to go out and get some experience. When I say you don't need a computer, you can log on paper. In fact, if you're going out for your first activation, especially if you're not a seasoned radio operator, I would highly recommend logging on paper. It's just one less thing that you're going to have to be figuring out. It's one less new thing that you're going to be working on while you're activating. And your brain can just 100% focus on the activation itself. Your brain can focus on listening to those weak signals, on dealing with any potential pileups, dealing with things that are going to go wrong in the field, and you don't have to be fighting your software at the same time. So give yourself a little while at first to log on paper, because you don't have to think about doing that. We've all written on paper with pencil enough that we can do that without thinking, and you're going to want that when you first get started. This also tends to not break. Of course, I got a mechanical pencil. I guess I could run out of lead, but this is going to be a lot more reliable than anything else electronic. It's just going to free up part of your mind to do it on paper first. Once you get some experience and you're comfortable activating, and you want to log on a device of some kind, knock yourself out. Okay, so let's talk about antennas. What are the keys to selecting a good antenna? My recommendation would be to find, if you can, one antenna, at least to start, that is multi-band and highly versatile. My first good POTA antenna was the, I think you can see it up on top of the RV there, was the Wolf River coils. The reason that worked so good for me is that I could use it on anything from 40 meters to 10 meters with one antenna. I got the full-size tripod base for it, so I didn't have to stab anything in the ground. I didn't have to hang anything in trees. Now I tend to operate in national parks, national monuments, national forests, and a lot of these places don't want you poking things in the ground or hanging stuff up in trees. So that antenna really comes in handy because of that. Now, given some time, I did kind of eliminate the coil mostly and work mostly with the Chameleon 17-foot whip, and that gives me everything from 20 meters and higher frequencies. So a lot of times it's just that. It's just the whip, and I can eliminate the coil unless I'm wanting 30 meters, 40 meters, 60 meters, 80 meters, and up. That keeps it kind of simple. That works in multiple situations. It works on multiple bands. That setup has worked really, really nice for me. It is smart to also have a horizontal option. For that, I acquired the Nelson Antennas 40-meter in-fed half wave. Why that one? Well, quite frankly, it's because that's the one I could find. These in-fed half waves are tricky to find. There's a lot of unobtainium in there, and the Nelson antennas you can usually find on eBay, and it's worked really good for me. It's also multi-band, so it's in a way it's even more handy than the Wolf River coils, because I don't have to adjust for 40 meters, for 20 meters, for 15 meters, for 10 meters. It covers all those 4 bands, the ones I'm most usually on, without any adjustment. It's a resonant antenna. This radio does not have a tuner, still works. And I'm usually around 1.5 to 1 on SWR, no problems. So those are my primary antennas. So I've got a vertical option, I've got a horizontal option, I've got the highly versatile vertical whip with the coil if I need it, and I've got the lighter weight in-fed half wave to go down the trail, to go on backpacking trips, to go down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, to go up on Angel's Landing. That doesn't add any weight. You add on the whip, you add on the coils, you add on the tripod, you'd be surprised how much weight that setup adds to your pack. If you need any kind of a mast for your antenna system, again, stay practical. If you think there's any chance that you might be taking some serious hikes, I wouldn't recommend a mast that goes up to 30 feet. That's gonna be heavy. I've got the 10-meter mast for my DX Commander antenna. Fantastic mast. It collapses down to about this long, but I took it on one trip and realized that it was far too heavy, and I switched to a 13-foot mast that was plenty enough to get the job done and was significantly lighter than that DX Commander mast. Now, a lot of us start, I think, in parking lots, at picnic tables, nearby parking lots, so that our vehicle's in play, and that's something that we can use to help us hold an antenna in the air, which is great. There's a lot of times I'm mag mounting the whip antenna to the roof of my truck. So if I'm operating anywhere on my truck, that's what I'm gonna do. I drive a 1-ton pickup. It pulls the 8-ton radio go box. That truck weighs 9,500 pounds, and it is a lot of metal. So there's a lot of metal ground in that truck. So when I mag mount antenna to the top, it is well grounded, and that has worked beautifully. I got 10,000 contacts on POTA. The vast majority of them are with that antenna setup. There's also a lot of drive-on mounts that people use. They can work really well also. And I've seen some folks even build stuff like that out of scrap materials they have at home. With some 2x4s and with some 2x4s. They're waving. I wonder if they're hams. They see my antenna and stop and wave hi. They seem really interested. So a lot of folks will even make a drive-up mount with some scrap 2x4s or plywood and some PVC pipe that they have laying around, and attach it in a way that you can drive on the wood and keep that PVC pipe vertical, stick your mast down in there, and you can hold it up that way. And I'll reiterate again, whether it's antennas, batteries, radios, anything, if you have to purchase anything, keep it practical. Start with what you got if you can. If you've got any of these options available to you that you can take out in the field and reasonably use, maybe just with some minor inconvenience to your home base station setup, do that. Get started, get out in the field, get some activations under your belt, and see what really makes you tick before you start specializing with more expensive gear for specific missions. Let's talk batteries. I've already shown my battery options that I've gotten. This is the Bioenno 15 amp hour 12 volt battery, lithium iron phosphate, and this was my original portable battery. I've been using it for 3 years now. Again, I'm not recommending specific products necessarily. This has worked really well for me. I think I got it for about 150 bucks. And everyone wants to know, how much do you get? How much operation time do you get with a battery like this? For my Rove, for the eight AT&Os that I wanted to activate in Maine, I timed this out, and I could run the, at that time I just had the Kenwood TS440, which only did 100 watts. I couldn't turn it down, and this would last 4 hours. And when I'm activating, I'm hitting it pretty hard. I don't call CQ POTA and then wait for 2 minutes. You know, I'm listening to static for 5 to 10 seconds, and I'm calling again. I'm going to make a lot of noise and keep that going, so if someone's tuning by, they got a better chance of hearing my call. Point being, I'm putting stress on the battery the whole time, and I am not trying to conserve it. 15 amp hours operating in that manner, it gets me 4 hours of operating time. And I've tested that multiple times, and it keeps coming out to exactly that number. The 4.5 amp hour battery running at either 25 or 50 watts seems to get me an hour 15, hour 25. I was timing that out for my Grand Canyon activation, and was surprised that going from 25 to 50 watts made little to no difference. Again, same advice, stay practical. If you have a battery that you can use, that you can dedicate to a parks on the air activation, go ahead and use that. Even if it's, you know, some folks will go out with a lead acid car battery, whatever. As long as it's not the one actually running your vehicle, that's fine. If that's how you get started and you're planning on activating out of your vehicle anyway, maybe out of the tailgate of your pickup truck, that'll work great, and that'll get you started. Get some experience under your belt before you go out and start buying stuff. Figure out what your modus operandi is going to be. Don't get too wrapped up on what the perfect battery is. Oh, I want this brand. I want this chemistry. If you have something that's imperfect but get you started, start with that. You can always keep something in mind for future purchases, but you can form this to what you know your mission's going to be after you've gained some experience. If it's imperfect, if your battery's imperfect, if your radio's imperfect, if your antenna's imperfect, fine, start with what you got. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. The radio. This is the part that's going to require the most amount of control for most of us, because this is the exciting thing to purchase. But the same thing, if you have a radio that you can take out in the field with a reasonable, acceptable level of inconvenience to your home station, do that. If I've got an IC 7300 that I'm comfortable taking out and operating from my truck, and removing it from my home base station is reasonable for me, is not that inconvenient, do that. And while you have it removed from your base station, activate a few times. Go out 3, 4, 5 times before you bring it back and hook it all up again, and see what you think, and then you can reevaluate from there. But if you have that opportunity, do that. Obviously, if you have a second radio that's available, then that's a better situation. Now, what if that second radio is QRP? Well, that depends. If you live east of the Mississippi River, where it seems like 80% of the POTA hunters live, you might be okay doing QRP. If you live in Nevada, and there might be 2 ham radio operators living within 100 miles of you, and they don't do POTA, you might have a harder time with QRP. So, you know, I'm careful recommending any kind of QRP. If you're out west, I'd say at least a 20 watt radio like the G90, the Zygu G90. You know, certainly if you're new to ham radio, I would hold off on the QRP until you got some activating experience under your belt. Okay, same advice. If you do need to get a radio, stay practical. This is a moderately affordable radio. It doesn't have a whole lot of frills, and that seems to take off about $400 from larger, better radios with the color display and the fancy waterfall. Guess what? When you're an activator, you don't need a waterfall. You're not going to be hunting around and looking for signals. You're just wanting a quiet spot. You're going to set up in that spot on the band, and you're going to start activating. And after that, you're probably not going to look at the waterfall much anymore. So, you know, that really isn't all that important. And that was one thing that drew me to this. Well, I'm not drawn to this radio because it doesn't have a waterfall, but it is less expensive because it doesn't have some of those frills. If at all possible, get a 100-watt radio. Again, this fits it pretty good. That's gonna serve you well in any type of situation. Whether you're out east, whether you're out west, a 100-watt radio is gonna get that activation done for you. Same advice as with the antennas. You want something that's versatile. You want a radio that can do multi-modes. There are a lot of guys out there that are primary Morse code operators, so they're going to be drawn to the Morse code only radios. But again, you don't know where your POTA journey is going to take you. So it's good to have the digital options. It's good to have the phone options for your activation. I have had a couple situations where CW did not work for me and voice did. I had an activation in Rocky Mountain National Park where I hiked up to Sky Pond. This was a warm-up activation for the Grand Canyon adventure. We were going to hike up to Sky Pond, and you were in a ring. When you're at the pond, you're in a ring of mountains that were 1,000 feet above you and close. You know, it was a steep angle to get a signal out of that bowl. So that's limiting me to begin with. CW in that situation got me 0 contacts. I made no contacts until I switched to voice. Now that's counterintuitive for most people, but I think what happened was, again, I was out west, so that's limiting the number of people who are hearing my signal, but there are also a lot fewer Morse code operators. So I think what happened was I had limited the number of people who could hear me a couple of times over, and that was just enough where it was really difficult to make a contact. I switched over to a voice mode and got a phone contact with Greg, KJ6ER, just like that, no problem. I got a park to park in Canada, just like that, no problem. I spoke with another gentleman that was just calling CQ in California, no problem. And those 2 California contacts were going over the mountain. I think the Canadian contact was going out of the one opening into the bowl, but the others were going over those mountains, and voice got it done and Morse code didn't. It's not because voice propagates better or does better than Morse code, it's just a matter of how many activators are out there. So again, you don't know what's going to happen in your POTA journey. Even if you're a Morse code only type person, it might be advantageous to have some other options, to have a radio that can do multi-modes. The one thing I can't do with this radio right now is digital, because I've never bought the digital interface. These things really don't interest me all that much. POTA hunters aren't in some of these more niche modes to the extent that you can get activations done. Like it's going to be tough to have an SST activation completed. FT8, FT4, yeah, you can get that done. Okay, so let's summarize with the radio. Keep it practical. Small form factor, bump the table. Small form factor is good. 100 watts. If you're out east and the G90 is available, you know, it's even, I won't say it's half the price of this radio, but it's close. If the G90 is available and it's cheaper, or you already have one, that'd be a good one to try with, but I wouldn't go with a radio powered less than that. And if I lived in the western portions of the United States, I would be hesitant for the 20-watt option. I would like to have more power in that situation. Yeah, you can get it done. I mean, there's plenty of people that will likely comment here and say, "Hey, I did this. I was in Nevada and I got this done easily. I made, 150 contacts with my G90." Sure, yeah, it'll work. Will it work every single time? Will it work the one time that you go on your first activation is the question. 100 watts is better. Just eliminates that one factor. You got enough power if you can run 100 watts. A lot of times now I find myself dialing it back to 50 and 25 to get the battery to last a little bit longer, and then I can carry this smaller battery. But I've always got the option to crank it up if need be. So that's it for the general equipment advice. I'm not trying to get you to buy specific equipment. That's not my role here. This works great for me. You're going to activate different than I am. You're going to go to different places. You're going to be in different geographic locations. You're going to use different modes. You're going to use a different level of power. Your propagation from your location is going to be different. You might be operating from a table. You might be operating from your tailgate or your hatchback. You might be in your car. You might just walk away a short distance from your car, sit at a picnic table. You might go down a short trail. You might go down into the largest canyon on the planet. You might go up to on a 14-footer. All these things are going to factor in what you're going to use for an antenna, a battery, and a radio. So it's really not productive for me to tell you what you should get. I'm trying to guide you in that journey and advise you on which things to make this decision, right? You don't need a fancy display. You don't need all that. This thing has all kinds of digital filters. I don't use them. I'm out in quiet parks. I don't need that. Here's the feature that I use right here. That one. That's the only button I need is to talk when I'm activating. I'm usually not touching any filters. You really don't need anything that fancy. Stay practical at the start, and as much as you can, start with what you got. Activating parks on the air is kind of like ham radio in general. There's a myriad of different directions for you to go. It's just going to take you a little bit of time to find that path. And when you do, go nuts. Get that equipment, because you know at that point you have a direction. All right, so I think that covers everything for this topic. Hopefully that gets you going in the right direction. That's really the mission here, to get you in the right direction to where you can start making your decisions. If you have any questions, drop them down in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, give me the thumbs up, give me a subscribe, and watch this playlist for more videos and more updates. The next video is going to be fun. We're going to start talking about the actual activation, what it's going to be like, what to expect, how many different ways there are to activate, and that's going to be fun. This is Kilo Echo Zero Victor India Mike, the Traveling Ham, covering your activating station setup. Signing off from Crystal Beach, Texas. See you next time. Here's the deal. I'm at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. This is going to be a special one. We're way up this mountain.
This is the operating station here.
Kilo Echo Zero Victor India Mike, park to park.
The traveler has come.
He was a huge, beastly, bulging man, plates were from